been following your work for a while now, and you're just doing some incredible things. You're an inspiring person, an inspiring advocate. And I'd love for you to just go ahead and introduce yourself, share a little bit more about your own personal experience and the work that you're doing now.
Thank you so much for having me on, Jason. It's like I was saying a bit earlier, I'm so grateful that the web can connect people on the other side of the world doing amazing work. I followed your page for a while now too, even though I describe myself as a little bit of a grandpa with Instagram. Like I jump on and I post and I try and interact, and then I'm not on there at all for days at a time sometimes. So I really want to be a bit more consistent soon. But I've been following your work for a long time as well. And I'm so grateful to be connected with other advocates in this space because we need more. And whenever I connect with another one, it's so rewarding and reassuring that that is being done in different corners of the globe. Yeah, I guess I wonder where to start for myself. I'm based in Brisbane, Australia, and I am an eating disorder focused dietitian and also lived experience peer worker as well with an organization called Eating Disorders Queensland. So it's a not-for-profit organization based here in Queensland, Australia, and we are funded by many wonderful bodies to be able to provide services free of charge to Queensland residents. And those services involve everything from one-to-one work, like what I work in with dietetics and lived experience work, as well as mental health practitioners working one-on-one with clients, as well as many group work settings as well, providing group therapeutic support groups across meal support, therapy, art, and more. And we're also involved in lots of community advocacy as well, everything from attending government parliament events, explaining what work we do, to going to hospitals, schools, other community settings as well, advocating about eating disorder awareness. But my journey spans a very, very, very long time, all the way back to childhood, of where I've lived with many forms of mental health experiences, I like to say, but difficulties spanning from anxiety and depression and obsessive compulsive disorder, all the way through to nowadays where I've recently been diagnosed as autistic and ADHD as well, which has evolved into a very different kind of learning journey for myself about learning and providing space for the difficulties and experiences I've had in history with my eating disorder and beyond, as well as trying to learn how to support myself and others in this space as I work now, as more and more people are discovering themselves as having been neurodivergent. My eating disorder experience, as mentioned, really first began in my mid to late childhood. And I won't go into all the details straight away if you don't like, but really started off with binge eating, which evolved into a mainly restrictive eating disorder and body image concerns. And that mainly lasted into and it impacted me in my adolescence. And then later on in life as well, I like to describe an eating disorder a little bit like a weed, where the roots of the eating disorder were still there deep in my psyche and hadn't fully been addressed just yet. And they sort of grew back a little bit differently later in adulthood when I really, really found myself in the depths of muscularity-oriented disordered eating and this pressure to live up to Western society's expectations for what they expect, I guess, male identifying people to look like. And it really took me until my early 20s to connect deeply with my mental health and reflect on why I was being impacted the way I was and on who I truly was as a person and what I actually deeply wanted out of my life and what I wanted to offer this world. And that helped me find what I identify, for the lack of a better phrase, as true eating disorder recovery. And nowadays, I guess I look at recovery a little bit differently as I navigate other mental health experiences, still living with, I guess, chronic or long-term anxiety and depression, but making space for those things, learning how to cope with those things, and learning how to be more accepting and compassionate towards myself after having lived as a neurodivergent person for such a long time and in different difficult environmental circumstances, and I guess paving the way for my future in more of an accepting and compassionate way.
Well, thank you for sharing all of that. So much of that resonates with me, especially that compassion piece, because I was lacking so much compassion for myself. And as somebody who also battles anxiety and I have OCD and the eating disorder, I was my own worst critic and my own worst enemy. And then you pile on the fact that there's such a stigma around men talking about
Mm.
their mental health. And I think that's why we see so few men in our space talking about their experiences, because there's a feeling of shame, or there's a feeling like they have to hide. And I'm just curious, what do you think we could do to get more men to speak up and to seek the help that they need?
It's such a brilliant question. And anecdotally, from what I've seen on social media and other media platforms, at least here in Australia, it's very, very, very slowly starting to shift where I don't like the word normal, but I think it's really helpful in this circumstance where men's mental health experiences, and let alone men's feelings and emotions and vulnerability, are really starting to be normalized or incorporated into what it means to be quote unquote masculine, right? We've been that shame and that stigma that you touched on there for so long. It's been so ingrained and normalized for men to be the stoic, tough ones that drink concrete and suck it up and get on with things. And I hear people speak about this, and I've seen it for myself where when men are vulnerable and cry or express anxiety or express sadness, people are really uncomfortable sometimes when they see that, when they're exposed to that. It's because they're not used to seeing men like that. But I think to answer your question, the more that this is normalized on a societal level in public health campaigns, with celebrities speaking out about their own experiences, with advocacy showing and really um, placing men in the spotlight, speaking about their experiences, more men will be able to have their experiences and feelings validated and may encourage them to speak out and get help themselves. And it may actually also help a lot of men who may not even recognize that they are experiencing mental health difficulties, eating disorders, body image concerns themselves. Because there's the population of people who may um, feel shame and stigma and not feel safe to speak about these things. And there's also people who may not even recognize that they are going through these things. Yeah, like I was saying, whether it's mental illness broadly or eating disorders specifically. So I think normalizing these experiences is going to help, and teaching as well about these experiences is going to help more people understand and feel safe speaking about them. And it goes for now at a societal level for grown adults, but also at a grassroots level with children and adolescents, teaching emotional intelligence, emotional literacy, about mental health and mental illness, about eating disorders and body image concerns, really teaching and normalizing these things from a young age. So generations who are coming through in future can learn about these things earlier, so they don't have to learn about them when it's too late and have to I guess start at a much later age, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I wish I would have known these things at a younger age. It's one of those things that I often think about, what I wish I could have heard when I was 6, 7, 8 years old, because it was already at that age where that stigma and those stereotypes were starting to creep in. And I think you hit it perfectly when you were talking about speaking up about our lived experience and sharing our stories. And the one thing that I see is when I go out and I share my stories, more times than not, I will have a young man come up to me and open up and share his story with me. And it takes one of those times, just one of those experiences of us sharing our stories. It kind of opens up the gates and allows others to feel safe and to be able to share their stories.
I
So,
love that so much, Jason. Sorry, you just reminded me of a point where it touches on what we were speaking about how for a long time with eating disorders, unfortunately, society has painted a picture of what they expect them to look like.
mhm.
The young, white, thin female. And even though that experience is valid and important and exists, it's really, I think, blocked off a whole range of eating disorder experiences that actually do exist.
Mhm.
And one subset of many diverse eating disorder experiences are obviously male identifying people. And just that example you shared there, like I'm in a sporting setting, playing for a sporting team, Australian rules football last year. Again, the complete opposite of what a stereotypical presentation would be. But at the end of the season, I think two or three other guys came up to me at the end of the season and privately shared with me about their experiences of binging and purging and body image concerns, and never would have guessed. And I felt a little bit of not shame, but I reflected on my own stereotypes myself about how I never would have expected them. And I had to really reflect deeply myself about why didn't I ever expect them to experience something like that. And I was so grateful that they came forwards and felt safe to share that with me, that after seeing the work that I had done, after the months of playing together and the season ending, they felt safe to step forward and say, "Hey, I've actually been wanting to tell you this." So thank you for raising that. You just reminded me, and it really touches on how many people in this context, men, may actually be experiencing these things and just don't know how, who, where to share them with.
Right, right. Yeah. And it puts a lot of, I kind of look at it almost as a responsibility as a man that's recovering from an eating disorder to share my story and to create that space. Because again, it was what I needed. And again, you talked about that stereotype, and it made me think about, I speak with a lot of our young athletes here in the US and American football. You don't think of eating disorders being rampant there either. But I have heard from American football players as well that are battling eating disorders. So it's time that we finally get rid of those stereotypes and start to realize that eating disorders can really happen to any of us. So to shift gears a little bit here, one of your posts coming up almost a year ago when you shared this, it really resonated with me, and it was a really powerful post to see. But you revealed that you finally received your diagnosis with autism and ADHD. And I'm just curious if you could walk us through that journey and what that was like to finally receive that diagnosis.
Yeah, I always wonder where to start with this. And I feel like a nice place to start is ever since I was a kid and since I can remember my earliest of memories, I've always felt different. I've always felt different to people around me. I've felt different to many family members. I've always felt like I've never really belonged anywhere. And Brene Brown talks about this so beautifully in her writing about the difference between fitting in places and belonging to places. And throughout my life, through lots of reflection with learning social cues and trends and camouflaging and being a chameleon with myself, masking is what I'm looking for in different environments. I've been able to fit in a lot of different places and form friendships or acquaintances in many different settings. So I've made it through, but it's just always felt so freaking hard to do that. I feel like ducks swimming along the water. They look peaceful and calm and pleasant and like they're fitting in somewhere, but underneath the water their legs are fighting for their life, right? And it's always felt like that in my life. I've just never really belonged anywhere. And the other thing which really stood out to me is just in so many different cases of my life, I've always been so I'll be cautious of the word obsessive because there's times where I feel like obsessive often comes with negative connotations. I've always been extremely hyper passionate about select things at a time and disinterested in so many other things which I felt like I should be interested in. I've noticed that, and some of those passions dash obsessions have remained my whole life. Other things have come and gone. And there's so many other examples that I could think of, but the last thing which really truly stands out to me is just this ongoing, like overbearing, um, overbearing, I'll say, passion for social justice and wanting people to feel safe and wanting people to feel heard and equal. And to the extent where I've never really fully understood why so many people don't care about it as much as what I do. Um, and yeah, I could keep going with examples, but I won't. Um, but it's really, and yeah, I've always wondered, why are things so much harder for me than they are for so many other people around me? And it really took me until working in the eating disorder space, where I was exposed to, I was working with people who are neurodivergent themselves and completing professional development in eating disorders associated with neurodivergence, how that influences eating, that I really truly started to reflect. It was kind of like mushrooms popping up left, right, and center, or like little light bulbs switching on in the room around me. Like, oh my gosh, that's me. This is me. This has been my life for so long. This happened when I was 14 and 16 and last year. Like, this is me. And the whole intersection with my eating disorder and exercise, that's a whole nother discussion in itself. It would take hours, but I really reflected on, wow, like, okay, I had an eating disorder and I wonder how certain eating and exercise patterns were a component of being neurodivergent as well. Um, and it took such a long time for me to feel confident and safe stepping forwards. But I said, you know what, I need to do this for me. I need the clarity. And at first, it was really, um, I was fairly confident that, okay, I think I'm autistic, but it really surprised me in a neutral way, not a good or a bad way. It really surprised me in a neutral way when I was given an ADHD diagnosis as well, and it really has taken me a long time to process. I'm still processing it now, mainly due to, I guess, grief that I didn't know earlier, but gratitude that there is more social acceptance and awareness and understanding nowadays to enable me to have taken that step forwards. And now I'm really still working through the many years of internalized shame and stigma about not never feeling like I belonged anywhere, like I was never good enough for anything. Really trying to work through those things and embracing speaking outwardly and openly to people at work and friendship settings and in beautiful places like this, that it's actually it's actually a strength of mine that I have been vulnerable to take these steps. And now I really want to embrace it and advocate for more men, but just people to feel safe to be able to receive a diagnosis and take steps forward to learn to work with themselves rather than against themselves.
Well, I can say you're making a difference out there because you share your story and you share your vulnerability so just beautifully and powerfully, and it really resonates on so many levels. So I'm so glad that you're using your experience and you're sharing your voice and you're helping to create that healing that you're so passionate about and fighting for rights that you're so passionate about. So I've just got one more question here for you before we wrap up, and it's along these lines. But how can we in the eating disorder space, especially, but overall, how can we be more supportive of neurodivergent individuals? What can we do to be an ally and be supportive and make sure that their experiences are valid and are heard and are seen?
Such a beautiful question. My brain could go on a million different places, but two things which really come to mind are, first of all, reflecting and vulnerably naming what the eating disorder space has gotten wrong, I think, for a really long time. Maybe not gotten wrong, but where things are outdated and where things are perhaps too rigid and not affirming enough or not welcoming of a diversity of experiences, and challenging the boxes that the eating disorder space puts people into, whether it be diagnoses, whether it be treatment protocols and therapeutic protocols, really naming that, okay, this is work, quote unquote, worked for select people for a certain amount of time, but it's outdated and we need innovative ways of doing things. or naming things or helping things or treating things, right? I think that's what is so very needed because neurodivergent people are a diverse range of people. And within neurodivergent people, there's so much diversity in itself. And I don't think that select, rigid, restrictive ways of going about things is going to help people enough or at all, let alone cause more harm and trauma. So I think it is reflecting on what needs to be done differently for neurodivergent people and that being okay. I think separately, it's overlap, but another thing which comes to mind is, and I've started really reflecting on my own journey and with clients as well, is the intersection between eating disorder behaviors and thoughts and experiences, how that does intersect with being neurodivergent and how eating disorders can become coping mechanisms for neurodivergent people, but really trying to separate the two. What is something which is harmful and um, doing, for lack of a better phrase, doing more harm than good for the neurodivergent person in terms of eating disorder behaviors, and what behaviors are actually really adaptive for the person. What behaviors are actually helping this person regulate and feel safe and feel okay within themselves and within their lives. And how can these behaviors actually be named or recognized a little bit differently than eating disorder behaviors? And how can they, with some education and support and guidance in an affirming manner, be adapted again to be more safe for the person? So I think it's recognizing diversity, what needs to be done differently, what needs to be remolded, and the eating disorder space also accepting that some behaviors that have been named or categorized as quote unquote maladaptive and harmful, which behaviors now actually need to be recognized as perhaps functional and adaptive for the person. And pulling those two apart is so important.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. And it's so interesting. I was just having this conversation with somebody the other day, but things that we used to think were the gold standard in this space for so long, we're now
Mm.
realizing aren't. And these are the conversations that we need to have to share that light and to be able to empower individuals who, for a long time, the system has actually been harming rather than helping. So
Hmm.
with that, Alex, I want to thank you again for joining me for this awesome conversation. I could talk with you all day. This has been awesome. I've got like a million other questions going on in my mind, but I'll keep it short now. If anybody wants to connect with you, where's the best place to find you? And I know you're involved with several organizations. Do you want to give them a shout out as well?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Jess. My the main platform on is Instagram, so it's all lowercase arod underscore dietitian. And I'm not the most regular poster because I've got a million things on, but I've got lots of posts on there, and I still try and post a few times a week about eating disorders, neurodivergence, and mental health more broadly. And I work for Eating Disorders Queensland and do some volunteer work with the Butterfly Foundation, which is the peak or national eating disorder awareness organization here in Australia. So if you're interested in the beautiful and wonderful work they do, please give them a follow as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks so much, Alex.
Thank you so much, Jason.
All right. I'll end the recording here.